The eviction notice arrived on their 50th wedding anniversary, delivered not by a stranger, but by their own son's law firm. Within 48 hours, they'd gone from beloved parents to unwanted tenants in the home they'd built with their own hands. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The morning everything changed started like countless others. Helen stirred the oatmeal while George read yesterday's newspaper, a habit born from frugality rather than preference for old news. Their German shepherd, Duke, dozed by the kitchen door, gray muzzle resting on crossed paws. At 78 and 76 respectively, they'd settled into retirement's gentle rhythms after decades of hard work. George had spent 40 years as a master carpenter, his hands shaping wood into furniture that graced homes throughout the county. Helen had balanced raising 4 children with running a small alterations business from their basement, her sewing machine humming late into countless nights to help pay for college tuitions and wedding expenses. Their home on Elmwood Drive wasn't grand, but every inch reflected their shared history. George had built the wraparound porch where their grandchildren learned to tie shoes and tell secrets. Helen had planted the garden that fed their family through lean times and celebrations alike. The walls held pencil marks tracking children's growth, nail holes from 40 years of Christmas stockings, and invisible imprints of laughter, tears, and time. The doorbell rang at precisely 9 a.m. Duke lifted his head, tail giving a half-hearted wag before settling back down. George shuffled to answer, movement slowed by arthritis that no amount of glucosamine could fully ease. Marcus stood on the threshold in his $1,000 suit, looking everywhere except his father's eyes. Behind him, a younger associate clutched a manila folder like a shield. "Son?" George's voice carried equal parts surprise and pleasure. "We weren't expecting you. Come in, your mother just made coffee." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't a social call, Dad. We need to discuss the house situation." Helen appeared in the hallway, dish towel in hand. "Marcus, what a lovely surprise. Should I call Patricia and the children?" "No, Mom. Patricia's at her Pilates class." He gestured to his companion. "This is Bradley from our real estate division. May we come in?" The formal tone set off warning bells in George's mind, but ingrained courtesy had him stepping aside. They gathered in the living room, the same space where Marcus had taken his first steps, announced his engagement, and introduced his firstborn child. Bradley opened his folder with practiced efficiency. "Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I'm here to inform you that the deed transfer has been completed. As of this morning, this property is legally owned by Marcus Sullivan." Helen's coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "I don't understand." Marcus finally met their eyes. "You signed the papers 6 months ago, remember? During Dad's recovery from the hip surgery. We discussed how managing the property was becoming too much for you both." George's mind raced backward. The surgery had left him foggy from pain medication. He vaguely recalled Marcus bringing documents, Patricia hovering with concerned expressions, talk of protecting assets, and ensuring proper care. "You said it was for tax purposes," George said slowly. "To protect the house if medical bills got overwhelming." "It was partly that," Marcus admitted, "but also practical planning for your future needs. This house is too much for you to maintain. The stairs are dangerous for Dad's hip. Mom, you can barely reach the upper cabinets anymore. It's time to transition to something more suitable." Helen found her voice. "Transition to where exactly?" Bradley produced glossy brochures. "Sunset Gardens Senior Living Community. It's the premier facility in the state. They have an opening in their assisted living wing, medical staff on-site, organized activities. Your son has made all the arrangements." "Assisted living?" George stood abruptly, ignoring the protest from his hip. "We don't need assistance. We've lived here for 42 years. Patricia swept into the room without knocking, her designer heels clicking against hardwood George had installed with his own hands. "Oh good, Bradley's here. Have you explained everything?" She air-kissed Helen's cheek while avoiding actual contact. "You're gonna love Sunset Gardens. They have a pottery class and everything. So much better than rattling around this old place." "This old place is our home," Helen said quietly. Patricia's smile tightened. "Of course it is. Was. But Marcus and I have 3 growing children who need space. This neighborhood has the best schools, and we've been cramped in our current house. It's perfect timing, really. The full picture crystallized with brutal clarity. Their son hadn't just taken their house. He planned to move his family into it. When? George asked, his carpenter's hands clenching and unclenching. We've scheduled the move for Monday, Marcus said. Professional movers will pack everything. You don't need to worry about anything. Monday is in 2 days, Helen whispered. I know it seems fast, Patricia interjected, but quick transitions are actually easier for seniors. Less time for anxiety to build. Duke, sensing distress, moved to lean against Helen's legs. She buried her fingers in his fur, drawing comfort from his solid presence. What about Duke? She asked. Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances. Sunset Gardens doesn't allow pets, Bradley answered. But there are excellent adoption services for senior animals. You want us to give up our dog? George's voice rose. Duke's been with us 12 years. Be reasonable, Dad. You can barely walk him anymore. It's not fair to the dog. I walk him every morning, George protested. Have for 12 years, hip replacement or not. This isn't a discussion, Marcus said, reverting to his courtroom voice. It's a notification. The decisions have been made in your best interest. Helen straightened in her chair. Our best interest? You stole our home. I did not steal anything, Marcus replied coldly. You signed the documents willingly. I'm trying to ensure you receive proper care in your declining years. The fact that the house can be better utilized by a young family is simply practical resource allocation. George looked at his son, searching for traces of the boy who'd helped him in his workshop, who'd cried when he accidentally broke a chair they'd built together, who'd promised to take care of them when he grew up. What about our things? Helen asked. My sewing room? Your father's workshop? Sunset Gardens allows 1 bedroom worth of possessions. We'll store family heirlooms, of course. The rest will be donated or disposed of appropriately. Disposed of? George repeated. My tools? Your mother's fabric collection? Dad, when's the last time you actually built anything? Mom, you haven't taken on alteration work in years. It's time to let go. But they had built things. Just last week, George had repaired the neighbor's fence. Helen had hemmed curtains for the church fellowship hall. Their skills hadn't vanished with age. They'd simply been redirected toward community rather than commerce. We won't go, George declared. Marcus sighed. I was hoping to avoid this, but you're not being given a choice. The house is legally mine. If you refuse to relocate voluntarily, I'll have to pursue eviction proceedings. As your son, I'd rather not put you through that embarrassment. As our son? Helen's voice cracked. What kind of son threatens his parents with eviction? The kind who sees them struggling and takes responsible action, Patricia answered. You should be grateful Marcus is handling this. Do you know how many elderly people end up in state facilities because their families won't step up? Duke growled low in his throat, the first aggressive sound any of them had heard from the gentle dog in years. Patricia stepped back hastily. Control your animal, she snapped. He knows a threat when he hears one, George said. Marcus stood, Bradley scrambling to follow. The movers arrive Monday at 8 a.m. I suggest you use the weekend to select what you'd like to take to Sunset Gardens. Patricia will be by tomorrow to help Mom sort through jewelry and important papers. Looking for valuable pieces? Helen asked with unusual sharpness. Patricia's face flushed. How dare you imply? Enough, Marcus interrupted. We're doing this for you, not to you. Someday you'll understand and be grateful. After they left, George and Helen sat in stunned silence. Duke positioned himself between them, head swiveling as if standing guard against further intrusions. How did we not see this coming? Helen asked. George pulled her close. Because we trusted our son. We saw what we wanted to see, a successful lawyer with a beautiful family, not a man who'd sell his parents' security for a better zip code. They spent that night going through papers, looking for anything that might help. But Marcus had been thorough. The deed transfer was ironclad, filed with the county, irrevocable. Their signatures stared back at them from documents they barely remembered signing. We have savings, Helen said around midnight. Not much, but enough for a few months' rent somewhere. George shook his head. Marcus has financial power of attorney too, remember? In case something happened and decisions needed to be made quickly. The trap's completeness was breathtaking. Under the guise of protection, their son had systematically stripped them of autonomy. Saturday dawned gray and drizzling. Patricia arrived with boxes and an appraiser, her efficiency in dismantling their life chilling to witness. She separated items into piles. Keep for Marcus, sell, donate, trash. Family photos were evaluated for their frame value. Helen's wedding china was boxed for Patricia's use. I've always admired this set, she said, wrapping plates Helen had received from her grandmother. It'll be perfect for holiday dinners. Those aren't yours to take, Helen protested. Actually, they are. The house contents convey with the property. Marcus was very clear about that in the documentation. But don't worry, we'll make sure you have everything you need at Sunset Gardens. They provide all meals anyway. George spent the day in his workshop, running his hands over tools accumulated across 5 decades. The table saw he'd bought with his first bonus. The lathe inherited from his father. Hand planes worn smooth by generations of use. Each tool represented not just equipment, but capability, independence, the ability to create and repair. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Reminiscing? Saying goodbye. George corrected. It's just stuff, Dad. Things. What matters is your health and safety. George picked up a chisel, its handle perfectly molded to his grip through years of use. This belonged to your great-grandfather. He used it to build the altar at St. Mary's. I used it to make your crib. You were going to pass it on to your son. Something flickered across Marcus's face. Guilt, perhaps, or buried memory. But Patricia's voice calling from the house broke the moment. Marcus, the estate jewelry appraiser is here. Marcus straightened. I have to go. The movers will pack all this tomorrow. Try not to make it harder than necessary. That evening, George and Helen sat on their porch swing, Duke between them, watching the sun set over the neighborhood they'd called home for 4 decades. Neighbors passed by, some waving, unaware their friends would be gone by Monday night. I've been thinking, George said, about options. Helen waited. My brother's old hunting cabin, up near Pine Ridge. It's been empty since he died 3 years ago. That place is barely standing, Helen said. No proper heating, probably no working plumbing. We haven't been up there in over a decade. But it's shelter, and it's 5 hours away from here. From them, Helen considered. The cabin was indeed primitive, more shed than home, but the alternative supervised living. Scheduled meals, organized activities designed to fill empty hours until death seemed worse than any physical hardship. What about Duke? She asked. He comes with us. Non-negotiable. We'd need supplies, food, medications, basic repairs to make it livable. I know someone who might help, George said. Remember Tom Martinez? We worked together for 20 years before he retired. He lives up that way now. It would be hard, Helen said. Maybe the hardest thing we've ever done. Harder than giving up? She squeezed his hand. When do we leave? Tonight, after dark. We pack what we can fit in the truck. Leave the rest for Marcus and his movers. Let them find an empty house Monday morning. He'll be furious. Good. Maybe fury will crack through that corporate facade and remind him he has parents, not just assets to manage. They spent the next hours in quiet, purposeful activity. George loaded tools, not everything, but enough to work with. Helen packed practical clothes, essential medications, the quilt her mother had made, photo albums Patricia had relegated to the trash pile, food for them and Duke, basic cookware, bedding, the truck, George's 1,998 Ford that Marcus had repeatedly urged him to replace, held more than expected. By 11 p.m., they were ready. Helen walked through the house one last time, touching walls, remembering. Here was where Katie had taken her first steps. There, the doorframe marked with heights and dates, the kitchen where countless meals had been prepared with love, even when ingredients were scarce. Duke seemed to understand, staying close, his usual bedtime routine abandoned. When George opened the truck door, he jumped in without hesitation. They left no note, What was there to say that their absence wouldn't communicate more eloquently? The drive through darkness felt like escape and exile combined. Helen dozed fitfully while George navigated familiar roads turned strange by circumstance. Duke remained alert in the back seat, watching the miles accumulate between them and the only home he'd known. Dawn found them at a truck stop, sharing gas station, coffee, and stale donuts. George's hips screamed from hours of driving, but he said nothing. Helen's arthritis made her hands clumsy with the coffee cup, but she managed. "You okay?" George asked. "I'm angry," Helen admitted. "Angry at Marcus, at Patricia, at myself for not seeing it coming. But also," she paused, searching for words, "oddly free, like we've been released from pretending everything was fine." "I know what you mean. All those family dinners where they talked about their vacations and renovations while we worried about prescription costs, smiling when Patricia criticized our housekeeping, or Marcus suggested we were becoming forgetful. We won't have to pretend anymore." The final hour of driving took them from maintained highways to rural routes to what could charitably be called a road to ruts through encroaching forest. George's truck, built in an era when vehicles were expected to handle rough terrain, managed where Marcus's luxury SUV would have failed. The cabin appeared through the trees like something from a dark fairy tale. Smaller than memory suggested, it listed slightly to the left. The porch roof had partially collapsed. Windows were boarded or broken. The front door hung at an angle, suggesting failed hinges. "Oh, George," Helen breathed. He killed the engine, silence rushing in like a tide. No traffic, no neighbors, no ambient city noise. Just whined in trees and their own breathing. Duke broke the spell, whining to be released. The moment George opened the door, the dog bounded out, nose to ground, tail wagging as he explored this new territory. "At least someone's happy," Helen observed. They climbed out stiffly, bodies protesting the long drive and sudden transition. In daylight, the cabin's deterioration was even more apparent. Moss covered the north wall. The chimney had partially crumbled. Gaps between logs would let in wind, rain, and wildlife. George tried the door. It opened with a shriek that sent birds fleeing from nearby trees. Inside was worse rodent droppings, scattered leaves, furniture reduced to springs and splinters. The kitchen sink had separated from the wall. The wood stove that provided the only heat source was rusted through in spots. "We can't live here," Helen said quietly. George put his arm around her. "Not yet, but I've rebuilt worse. Remember our first apartment? The one where the ceiling leaked and the floors slanted? We were 25 then. We had energy and hope and knees that bent properly. We still have hope, and Duke, and each other. The rest we'll figure out." Duke appeared in the doorway, a stick in his mouth, tail wagging expectantly. Despite everything, Helen laughed. "He's right," she said. "Standing here won't fix anything. Where do we start?" They spent that first day in triage mode. George cleared the worst debris while Helen organized their supplies. The truck provided shelter for the first night, uncomfortable but safer than the cabin's unknown interior. Morning brought Tom Martinez, George's friend who'd gotten his cryptic late-night call. Tom arrived in a pickup loaded with supplies, tarps, basic tools, canned goods, and most importantly, knowledge of local resources. "Jesus, George," Tom said, surveying the cabin. "When you said you needed a place to stay, I figured you meant for a weekend." George explained their situation while Tom listened with growing outrage. "Your own son? That's cold, man. That's ice cold." "It is what it is," George said. "Question now is making this livable before winter." Tom studied the structure with a contractor's eye. "Bones are solid. Your brother built to last. New roof, obviously. Patch the walls. Replace the stove. It won't be fancy, but it could work." "We don't have much money," Helen admitted. "You've got friends," Tom countered. "And there's a whole community up here that remembers when helping neighbors wasn't a financial transaction. Let me make some calls." What followed was a lesson in rural generosity. Tom's calls activated a network of people who understood hardship and responded to it with action rather than judgment. Betty Chin, who ran the local food bank, arrived with boxes of non-perishables and a keen assessment of what else they'd need. "Nobody goes hungry on my watch," she declared, refusing their protests about paying. Jim Washington, a retired plumber, examined the water situation. The well pump was shot, but the well itself was good. "Got a rebuilt pump sitting in my shed," he said. "Been meaning to sell it, but seems like it's found its purpose." Sarah and Miguel Rodriguez brought roofing materials left over from their own renovation. Their teenage sons volunteered muscle for the heavy lifting. Within a week, the cabin began its transformation. New shingles replaced the collapsed sections. Gaps between logs were filled with chinking. The broken windows gave way to clean glass that let in light and kept out wind. George worked despite his hip's protests. The familiar rhythm of hammer and saw providing therapy no medication could match. Helen established an outdoor kitchen, preparing meals for the volunteers, her skill stretching simple ingredients into sustaining food. Duke appointed himself supervisor, moving between workers with tail-wagging encouragement, as if he understood this flurry of activity meant home. Evenings brought exhaustion, but also satisfaction. They'd sit on the repaired porch, watching sunset paint the mountains, feeling accomplishment that had been missing from their supervised retirement. "You know what I don't miss?" Helen said one evening. "The guilt. Patricia always made me feel guilty for not being grateful enough for their visits, for wanting to maintain our own life instead of orbiting theirs." George nodded. "Marcus kept pushing us to be old, to accept limitations, to step aside gracefully. Here, nobody cares that I need to rest my hip every hour. They just appreciate what I can do in the other 45 minutes. 2 weeks into their cabin life, unexpected visitors arrived. Not Marcus or Patricia, but their other children. Daughter Lisa from Seattle and son David from Boston. They pulled up in a rental car, faces mixing concern and confusion. "Mom? Dad?" Lisa called. "What the hell is happening?" The reunion was tearful. Lisa and David had received frantic calls from Marcus about their parents' deteriorating mental state and dangerous decision to live in squalor. "We had to see for ourselves," David explained. "Marcus made it sound like you'd lost your minds." Helen served coffee in mismatched cups while George gave them the full story. Their children's faces cycled through shock, anger, and shame. "I knew he was focused on money," Lisa said, "but this is theft." "We should have paid more attention," David added. "Should have visited more, been involved. We let Marcus handle things because he was closest." "You had your own lives," Helen said gently. "We never wanted to be burdens." "You're not burdens," Lisa said fiercely. "You're our parents. There's a difference between needing help and being helpless." Marcus apparently never learned that. They stayed 3 days, diving into the renovation work with enthusiasm that reminded George and Helen of long-ago summer projects. Lisa attacked the kitchen, scrubbing decades of grime while planning improvements. David worked alongside his father, their hands finding remembered rhythms from childhood building projects. What happens next will turn this cabin from shelter to sanctuary, transform a family's understanding of betrayal and loyalty, and prove that sometimes the best revenge against those who discard you is to thrive without them. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. On their final morning, Lisa and David presented their parents with a check. "It's not much," David said, "but it's what we could pull together quickly. For materials," Lisa added, "and whatever else you need. We'll send more monthly." George started to protest, but Helen touched his hand. This wasn't charity or obligation. This was family, the real kind, based on love rather than legal documents. After their children left, work on the cabin accelerated. The money allowed for crucial improvements: a proper wood stove that would heat efficiently, insulation for the walls, a small solar panel system for basic electricity. George built furniture from salvaged lumber, a bed frame that didn't creak, chairs that supported aging backs, a table where 2 people could share meals and memories. Each piece reflected decades of skill, proof that craftsmanship doesn't expire at retirement age. Helen transformed the interior. Curtains sewn from fabric she'd saved softened the windows. The quilt from her mother covered their bed. Photos salvaged from Patricia's trash pile created a gallery wall of better times. The garden came next. Despite the late season, Helen coaxed cold, hardy vegetables from the mountain soil. Tom brought deer fencing. Betty contributed seeds saved from her own garden. By early fall, green shoots promised future sustenance. Duke thrived in his new environment. The dog who'd been slowing down in suburbia rediscovered youth chasing squirrels and patrolling territory. His coat gleamed. His eyes brightened. He seemed to understand this place was truly theirs. Marcus discovered their location in September. He arrived unannounced, his Mercedes struggling up the rough road, paint scratching against encroaching branches. Patricia remained in the car, unwilling to risk her designer shoes on unpaved ground. George was splitting wood when the car appeared. He didn't stop swinging the axe, letting the rhythm continue as Marcus approached. "Dad." George split another log. "We need to talk." "About what?" George asked, still not looking at his son. "Come to steal the cabin too?" Marcus flushed. "I didn't steal anything. I protected your assets from potential medical liens. By putting us on the street, I found you excellent assisted living." George finally turned, axe still in hand. "You found storage for inconvenient parents so you could take our home. Don't dress it up as concern." Helen emerged from the cabin, Duke at her side. The dog positioned himself between her and Marcus, hackles slightly raised. "Hello, Marcus." "Mom, you look." He paused, apparently surprised. "You look well." She did look well. Mountain air and purposeful days had brought color to her cheeks. Her movements were sure, lacking the tentative quality that had marked her final months in suburbia. "Hard work agrees with us," she said simply. "Why are you here?" "To bring you home. This," he gestured at the cabin. "Experiment has gone on long enough. Winter's coming. You can't seriously plan to stay here without proper heat or facilities." George laughed, a harsh sound. "Proper heat? This wood stove could warm a space twice this size. Facilities? The composting toilet works better than the low-flow mandated nonsense in your McMansion." "Dad, be reasonable. You're almost 80 years old. And more capable than you apparently believe. I've rebuilt this entire structure. Your mother's growing enough food to supplement our needs. We have community, purpose, dignity. What exactly are you offering that's better?" "Security," Marcus said. "Medical care when you need it. Social interaction with peers. Safety." "We have all that," Helen interjected. "Dr. Morrison in town sees us monthly. Betty Chen organized a senior lunch group. Tom checks on us daily. Real community. Not scheduled activities designed to warehouse the elderly." Patricia honked the horn, impatience clear even without words. Marcus's professional composure cracked. "Fine. You want to play pioneers? Go ahead. But when you fall, when you get sick, when this fantasy collapses, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." "We never expected anything from you," George said quietly. "That's the difference between us. We give without keeping score. You take while calculating value." Marcus turned to leave, then paused. "The kids ask about you. I don't know what to tell them." "Tell them the truth," Helen suggested. "That their grandparents chose freedom over comfort. That we're building something from nothing. That we love them even if we can't see them. I won't have them visiting here. It's not safe." "Then that's your choice," George said. "Add it to all your others." After Marcus left, George and Helen stood together watching dust settle from his departure. Duke leaned against their legs, offering wordless comfort. "Think he'll be back?" Helen asked. "Not until he needs something," George predicted. Fall arrived in spectacular fashion. Mountains blazed with color, reds and golds, that seemed to set the very air on fire. George and Helen established routines that revolved around necessity and nature rather than arbitrary schedules. Mornings began with Duke's Walk, a mile-long circuit that kept all three moving despite creaking joints. George collected kindling while Helen identified useful plants, late berries, medicinal herbs, edible mushrooms. Under Tom's careful tutelage, the renovated cabin proved cozy as temperatures dropped. Efficient insulation and the new wood stove created warmth that penetrated bones in ways central heating never had. They'd sit evenings by the fire, George whittling while Helen quilted, Duke dreaming dog dreams at their feet. Tom introduced them to the local bartering economy. George's furniture repairs earned credits at the general store. Helen's mending skills were traded for fresh eggs and milk, their social security checks, no longer drained by suburban expenses, accumulated modest savings. "We're richer now than when we had the house," Helen observed one evening, reviewing their simple accounts. George looked up from the chess set he was carving. "How do you figure? No mortgage, no property taxes, no homeowner's insurance. Utilities are wood we cut ourselves and sun that charges the batteries. Food is what we grow or trade for. We're not rich in money, but we're free from needing much of it." The first snow arrived early November, transforming their valley into crystalline beauty. They were ready, wood stacked high, pantry full, windows sealed against drafts. The cabin that had seemed uninhabitable 6 months earlier now stood sturdy against winter's approach. On Thanksgiving, their isolation ended unexpectedly. Lisa arrived first, her car loaded with supplies and grandchildren George and Helen hadn't seen in 2 years. David followed an hour later, his family equally laden. "We decided," Lisa announced, "that if Marcus won't let his kids visit their grandparents, ours need double doses to compensate." The cabin filled with noise and life. Grandchildren explored every corner, delighting in the rustic simplicity. No video games, no scheduled activities, just space to run and imagine. They helped Helen cook over the wood stove, fascinated by the primitive methods. They watched George work wood with hand tools, begging to try themselves. Tom and Betty joined them for dinner, along with Jim and his wife. The table, built by George from pine he'd felled himself, groaned under dishes prepared with love, if not luxury. Everyone contributed something, creating abundance from individual simplicities. "This is the best Thanksgiving we've had in years," David's wife admitted. "No pretense, no competition over who brought the fanciest dish. Just family." Duke stationed himself under the table, accepting tidbits from multiple small hands with dignity befitting his age and status. As darkness fell and grandchildren drowsed by the fire, adult conversation turned serious. "We want to help more," Lisa said. "Not just money, time, visits, whatever you need." "We need you to live your lives," Helen replied. "But knowing you're there, that you care, that's everything." "What about legal action?" David asked. "What Marcus did, there must be recourse." George shook his head. "Would take money we don't have for lawyers who might not win? And what would we gain? A house we no longer want in a neighborhood that holds bitter memories? We've moved on." "It's not about the house," David protested. "It's about justice." "Justice is living well without him," Helen said. "Justice is proving his assessment wrong. We're not declining. We're not incapable. We're thriving in ways that matter." Winter settled over the mountains with serious intent. Snow piled deep, transforming the landscape into something from a holiday card. The cabin, now properly sealed and heated, became a warm refuge in the white expanse. Challenges arose, certainly. The road became impassable for days at a time. Power from the solar panels diminished under cloudy skies. George's hip complained more in the cold. Helen's arthritis required creative adaptations for daily tasks. But solutions emerged from community. Tom organized a snow-clearing rotation among neighbors with plows. Betty coordinated supply runs when weather permitted. Jim helped George install a battery bank to store power for cloudy stretches. They learned winter's rhythms. Mornings for necessary tasks while energy peaked. Afternoons for indoor projects. George building furniture on commission now. Word of his skill spreading through the valley. Helen's quilts, created during long evenings, found eager buyers through Betty's connections. Duke adapted to snow with puppyish enthusiasm, bounding through drifts despite his advancing age. He seemed to understand his humans needed encouragement, providing it through unflagging spirits and constant companionship. In January, unexpected news arrived via Lisa. Marcus was divorcing Patricia. Apparently, Lisa reported during a phone call, she was having an affair with her tennis instructor. Marcus discovered it when credit card bills showed charges at hotels during her supposed Pilates classes. Helen felt no satisfaction at the news. Those poor children. From what I hear, Patricia's more interested in alimony than custody. She's already moved in with a tennis pro. And Marcus? Living in your old house alone. The kids are with him, but struggling. The older ones especially. They don't understand why everyone keeps leaving. That night, Helen discussed it with George. Those children need stability. Not our problem, George said, but his tone lacked conviction. They're still our grandchildren. Whatever Marcus did, they're innocent. What are you suggesting? Nothing yet, just thinking. February brought a blizzard that isolated the valley for a week. George and Helen weathered it cozily, playing cards by lamplight, reading books they'd never had time for during working years, cooking elaborate meals because they could. Duke developed a cough that worried them until Betty managed to get through with antibiotics from the vet. The dog responded well, returning to his supervisory duties within days. Tough old bird, George commented, rubbing Duke's ears. Like his humans, Helen replied. As spring began its tentative arrival, melting snow revealed the cabin's surroundings transformed by their efforts. Raised garden beds waited for planting. A chicken coop built by George with help from Tom's grandsons stood ready for occupants. The woodshed, expanded and reorganized, held enough fuel for another winter. We did this, Helen marveled one morning, surveying their domain. At our age, we built a homestead from ruins. We're not done yet, George said. I want to add a greenhouse, extend the growing season, maybe add a workshop proper, not just a corner of the cabin. Big plans for someone who's declining. Spite his excellent motivation, in April, Marcus called. His voice sounded different, older, tired, uncertain. Mom, it's me. Helen gripped the phone tighter. Hello, Marcus. I wanted to see how you're managing, with winter and everything. We managed fine. Your sister and brother visited regularly. Tom and the neighbors helped when needed. That's good. Good. A pause. Mom, I made mistakes. Helen waited. Patricia left. You probably know that. The kids are struggling. I'm struggling. Everything I thought mattered doesn't. What do you want, Marcus? I don't know. Maybe just to hear your voice. To know you don't hate me entirely. I don't hate you. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. But hate? No. You're still my son. Even if you forgot how to be one. She heard him breathing, possibly crying. Could I bring the kids to visit? They ask about you constantly. I've run out of excuses. Helen's heart clenched. They're always welcome. You know that. And me? That depends. Are you coming as the man who stole our home? Or as our son who lost his way? As someone trying to find it again? Then you're welcome too. The visit was scheduled for the following weekend. George grumbled, but spent the days making the place especially welcoming. He built a tree swing for the grandchildren, repaired an old bicycle found in Tom's shed, cleared a picnic area by the stream. Helen baked favorites. She remembered each grandchild, loving, stocked, child-friendly foods, prepared the small loft space for young guests. Duke seemed to sense impending arrivals, stationing himself by the door hours before the scheduled time. Marcus arrived in a sensible SUV rather than his Mercedes. The children, Emma, 12, Josh, 10, and Chloe, 7, tumbled out with the barely contained energy of kids freed from long confinement. Grandma! Grandpa! They raced toward the cabin, Duke meeting them halfway with tail-wagging joy. Marcus emerged slowly, looking around with obvious surprise. The dilapidated structure from his September visit had become something from a storybook, smoke curling from the chimney, garden beds showing green promise. The whole scene, speaking of purposeful care. You've done amazing things here, he said. George nodded, accepting the observation without warmth. Forgiveness would take time. The weekend unfolded with careful navigation of old wounds and new possibilities. The children thrived in the mountain environment, helping with chores that felt like adventures, discovering the joy of simple pleasures. Emma helped Helen in the garden, asking endless questions about plants and preservation. Josh shadowed George in the workshop, hands eager for tools and techniques. Chloe appointed herself Duke's personal attendant, following the patient dog everywhere. Marcus watched his children bloom in the rustic setting with visible wonder. They're different here, he told Helen. Calmer, happier. Children usually are when they feel genuinely welcomed rather than scheduled. He absorbed the gentle rebuke without protest. On the second evening, after the children were asleep in the loft, real conversation finally happened. They sat on the porch, George, Helen, and Marcus, watching stars appear in the clear mountain sky. I convinced myself I was being practical, Marcus said. That sentiment was less important than square footage in school districts. Patricia reinforced that. Made me believe success meant upgrading everything, including family. We didn't raise you to think that way, George said. No, you raised me to value hard work and integrity. Somehow I twisted that into valuing only material achievement. He paused. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand how I became someone who could do what I did. And the therapist says I was so focused on not being poor like we were when I was young that I lost sight of what real wealth meant. I wanted to give my kids everything I didn't have, forgetting that what I did have, parents who loved me, a home that was safe, if not fancy, was worth more than any mansion. Helen reached over to touch his hand. Recognition is the first step. Is there any way back? Marcus asked. Any path to redemption? There's always a path, George said. But it's not backwards. It's forward, different from before. We can't live in your house again. It's tainted now. You can't undo the betrayal. But maybe we can build something new. I want my kids to know you, really know you, not just see you at scheduled holidays. I want them to learn what you have to teach: woodworking and gardening, yes, but more. Values, resilience, the knowledge that life's worth isn't measured in possessions. Then bring them, Helen said simply. As often as you can, let them experience this life, understand these choices. Marcus nodded, tears visible in the starlight. The visit ended with promises of regular returns, not grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations, but small steps toward healing. The children hugged their grandparents fiercely, already planning next visit's activities. Duke watched the car disappear down the mountain road, then returned to his usual spot between George and Helen's chairs. Think he means it? George asked. I think he wants to, whether wanting is enough. Helen shrugged. Time will tell. May brought full spring glory to their valley. The garden exploded with growth. The chickens Betty had sourced began producing eggs. Wildflowers carpeted meadows in paintbox colors. George's furniture business had grown beyond local word of mouth. A feature in the regional newspaper about mountain craftsman proves retirement is just a beginning brought orders from neighboring counties. He worked at his own pace, selecting projects that interested him, turning away what didn't. Helen's quilts had found their own following. A shop in the nearest town displayed them on consignment, selling to tourists seeking authentic mountain crafts. Each piece told a story through fabric, some joyful, some poignant, all genuine. Their bank account, once terrifyingly slim, now held comfortable reserves. Not wealth by suburban standards, but security by their new metrics. Lisa visited for Mother's Day, bringing her family and a surprise Rebecca, their youngest daughter, home from Denver for the first time in 3 years. Mom, Dad, this place is incredible, Rebecca said, surveying their domain. When Lisa told me what you'd accomplished, I had to see for myself. The reunion was joyful. Rebecca had always been the free spirit, the one who understood choosing unconventional paths. She immediately grasped why her parents had traded suburban comfort for mountain authenticity. You're living my dream, she admitted. Self, sufficiency, community, purpose. I'm stuck in a corporate cube farm, slowly dying inside. So change, Helen suggested. You're young enough to start over. It's not that simple. I have a mortgage, car payments, student loans. It's exactly that simple, George countered. The cage door is open. Whether you fly out is your choice. Rebecca spent her visit thoughtfully, asking detailed questions about their transition, their challenges, their victories. When she left, it was with a promise to reassess her own life's direction. Marcus kept his word about regular visits. Every few weeks, his SUV navigated the mountain road. The children's excitement never dimmed. If anything, it intensified as they developed genuine relationships with their grandparent. Emma showed aptitude for woodworking, her hands steady and patient under George's guidance. Josh discovered a love of cooking over the wood stove, experimenting with recipes that sometimes succeeded spectacularly and sometimes failed hilariously. Chloe became Helen's gardening shadow, learning to identify plants and understand their needs. Marcus himself began participating rather than merely observing, He helped with heavy lifting, learned basic carpentry, even attempted cooking. With notably less success than his son, the expensive clothes gave way to practical wear. The perfectly styled hair surrendered to mountain wind. "You're different here too," Helen observed one evening. "I remember who I used to be here," Marcus replied, "before I decided that wasn't enough." Summer arrived with its own rhythms. Longer days meant extended productivity. George added the greenhouse he'd envisioned, a simple structure but effective for extending the growing season. Helen's garden produced abundantly, requiring lessons in preservation, canning, drying, root cellaring. The community that had embraced them expanded its connections. They were no longer the elderly couple who'd fled family troubles, but integrated members of the mountain network. George served on the volunteer fire department's support committee. Helen joined the library board. Both participated in the informal economy of skills and goods that kept the community thriving. Duke, despite his advancing age, remained their constant companion. The mountain life seemed to have given him renewed vitality, though George and Helen both noticed his movements slowing, his naps lengthening. "He's been a good friend," George said one evening, watching Duke patrol the perimeter of their property. "The best," Helen agreed. "I hope we have him a few years yet." August brought unexpected drama. Patricia appeared without warning, driving a sports car wholly unsuited to mountain roads. She emerged looking out of place in designer clothes and impractical shoes, surveying the cabin with barely concealed disdain. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said by way of greeting. "We haven't been hiding," George replied. "We've been living." "What do you want, Patricia?" To discuss the children's exposure to this situation. "I have concerns about safety and appropriateness." Helen stepped forward. "The children are thriving here, learning real skills, experiencing nature, understanding values beyond material acquisition. Exactly my concern. They're being exposed to primitive conditions and outdated perspectives." Emma came home talking about building furniture by hand instead of buying it. "Josh wants to raise chickens. These aren't appropriate aspirations for children of their social standing." "Social standing?" George laughed harshly. "You mean the standing you achieved by cheating on their father?" Patricia flushed. "That's a separate issue. I'm here about the children's welfare." "No," Marcus said, appearing from the workshop where he'd been helping George. "You're here because you want to increase child support and think claiming endangerment will help your case." Patricia whirled on her estranged husband. "You've been bringing them here regularly, exposing them to," she gestured wildly, "this, to their grandparents, to honest work, to understanding that life offers more than tennis lessons and shopping." "I'll petition the court." "Try it," Marcus interrupted. "Explain to a judge why children learning practical skills from loving grandparents is harmful. Explain why a paid tennis instructor is a better influence than family who actually cares about their development." Duke chose that moment to amble over, positioning himself between the arguing adults and the cabin where the children were helping Helen prepare lunch. His message was clear. No conflict would reach the young ones on his watch. Patricia, perhaps recognizing a battle she couldn't win, retreated to her impractical car. "This isn't over," she warned. "Yes, it is," Marcus said quietly. "You made your choices. Live with them. But don't interfere with my parents' relationship with their grandchildren." After she left, leaving dust and discord in her wake, Marcus turned to his parents. "I'm sorry. She's become worse since the divorce proceedings started. Everything is about leverage and assets to her." "She was always that way," Helen observed. "You just couldn't see it before, or chose not to," Marcus admitted. The incident strengthened rather than weakened the family bonds. The children, unaware of the drama, continued their mountain education with enthusiasm. By summer's end, Emma had completed her first furniture project, a simple stool, but properly made. Josh successfully raised chicks to laying age. Chloe knew every plant in Helen's garden by name and use. Labor Day weekend brought a gathering that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. All three of George and Helen's children converged on the cabin with their families. Lisa from Seattle, David from Boston, Marcus with his three. Even Rebecca returned, announcing she'd quit her corporate job and was exploring options for simpler living. The cabin overflowed. Tents sprouted in the meadow. Outdoor cooking stations expanded the kitchen. Duke moved between groups, tail wagging, collecting pets and treats with democratic fairness. "This is what we missed," Lisa said, watching her children play with their cousins. "Not just the place, but the purpose, the connection." They prepared a feast from the garden's bounty, supplemented by contributions from each family. The table George had built groaned under the weight of food and love. Stories flowed, memories of childhood, plans for future, acknowledgement of time lost, and determination to reclaim it. "A toast," David proposed as sunset painted the mountains gold, "to Mom and Dad, who showed us that starting over is possible at any age, who proved that betrayal can become blessing if you have courage to transform it. To Duke," young Josh added, "who guards us all." The dog, hearing his name, thumped his tail approvingly. As darkness fell, they built a bonfire. Marshmallows were roasted, songs were sung, stars were counted. The children dozed against their parents, worn out by mountain air and cousins' company. George surveyed the scene. His family, fractured by greed and misunderstanding, had reassembled a new configuration. Not perfect, but present. Not without scars, but healing. "You did this," he told Helen quietly. "We did this," she corrected, "by refusing to accept the story others wrote for us." September brought changes. Rebecca moved to a small town an hour away, taking a job at a craft cooperative that valued her business skills without consuming her soul. She visited weekly, sometimes bringing potential romantic interest for her parents' approval. Marcus's divorce finalized with Patricia receiving less than she'd demanded but more than she'd earned. The children remained primarily with Marcus, spending alternate weekends with their mother in the city, an arrangement that highlighted the contrast between their parents' values. "I hate going to Mom's," Emma confided to Helen. "All she cares about is appearances. Did we dress right? Are our manners perfect? What will her friends think? Here, you care about whether we're learning, whether we're kind, whether we're happy." Helen hugged her granddaughter. "Your mom loves you in her own way. She just shows it differently." "I like your way better," Emma said simply. October arrived with spectacular foliage. The mountains blazed with color that drew tourists from distant cities. Some found their way to George's workshop, now sporting a modest sign, "Mountain Craft Furniture by Appointment." One such visitor was Eleanor Hartwell, owner of a high-end gallery in the state capital. She examined George's work with expert eyes, running manicured fingers over joints and finishes. "This is exceptional," she declared. "True craftsmanship is nearly extinct. I could sell everything you produce." George named prices that seemed astronomical to him, but that she accepted without negotiation. "I can only produce perhaps one piece monthly," he warned. "I'm 79 years old. Speed isn't my strength anymore." "Quality over quantity," she assured him. "That rarity makes each piece more valuable." The partnership that developed brought financial security beyond their dreams. Not wealth by conventional standards, but enough to ensure they'd never again be vulnerable to others' decisions about their fate. Helen's quilts found similar appreciation. A feature in a national craft magazine brought orders from across the country. She accepted only what she could complete with joy, turning down pressure to mass produce or compromise quality. Winter approached with familiar signs. Geese headed south in ragged V's. Frost-silvered morning grass. Duke moved more stiffly, seeking sunny spots for longer naps. They prepared with practiced efficiency. Wood split and stacked. Garden preserved and stored. Cabin weatherproofed against coming storms. But this year brought help grandchildren eager to participate. Adult children ensuring nothing was neglected. "We want to add a room," David announced during Thanksgiving visit. "For when we stay. Nothing fancy, but proper space, so we're not always camping." "Materials are expensive," George warned. "We'll manage," Lisa added. "Among all of us, we can afford to improve what you've built. Consider it investment in family property." The concept of family property, rather than mom and dad's cabin, marked a shift. This place had become not just George and Helen's refuge, but a gathering point for extended families seeking connection to something real. December brought the season's first significant snow, transforming the valley into pristine white. The cabin, now properly insulated with a reliable heating system, provided cozy shelter. The wood stove crackled, Soup simmered. Duke dozed on his bed, occasionally twitching through dog dreams. A week before Christmas, Tom arrived with somber news. "It's Jim," he said. "Heart attack yesterday. He's stable, but Martha's struggling. Hospital bills are going to bury them." The community responded as communities do when they're real rather than just geographic. Fundraisers organized, meals delivered, support provided without request or obligation. George and Helen contributed what they could financially, but also offered something more valuable: their story, now well known in the valley. "We lost everything and found ourselves," Helen told Martha. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." Christmas Eve brought unexpected magic. All the children and grandchildren converged, despite threatening weather. Rebecca brought her new boyfriend, a furniture maker who spent hours talking shop with George. David's wife announced pregnancy, a new grandchild to carry family forward. Marcus arrived looking healthier than he had in years. The stress of maintaining false success replaced by genuine contentment. They decorated a tree cut from their own land. Ornaments were handmade, carved by George, sewn by Helen, crafted by grandchildren from mountain materials. Presents were modest but meaningful, focused on utility or sentiment rather than impressiveness. "This is the best Christmas ever," Chloe declared, and her cousins agreed. Duke, now clearly in his final season, but still alert to family presence, positioned himself where he could see everyone. His tail thumped approval of the gathering. That night, after children were asleep and adults sat quietly by the fire, Marcus made an announcement. "I've been offered a position with a small firm here in the valley. Less money, but better life. I'm taking it." The decision meant the grandchildren would be nearby always, not just visiting. It meant daily, rather than scheduled relationships. It meant Marcus choosing family over ambition, a reversal of everything that had driven their estrangement. "It's a good choice," George said simply, but his eyes showed deeper emotion. New Year's Eve found them gathered again, watching stars rather than fireworks, making resolutions based on values rather than achievements. "What's your resolution, Grandpa?" Josh asked. George considered. "To finish the projects that matter, to teach what I know to those who want to learn, to appreciate each day I'm given with the people I love." "Mine's to expand the garden," Helen added. "To preserve more, waste less, to document family recipes and stories before they're lost." The children made their own promises to learn new skills, help more, complain less. Simple goals, but meaningful in their specificity. Duke's resolution, unspoken but clear, was simply to see another spring with his family. They all understood without words that this might be ambitious for a 1-3-year-old dog who'd already defied expectations. January passed quietly. Deep snow limited visitors, creating cocoon-like intimacy in the cabin. George worked on special projects: a cradle for the coming grandchild, a jewelry box for Emma's approaching 13th birthday, refinements to furniture that would outlast its maker. Helen documented recipes accumulated over decades, gardening wisdom learned through trial and error, family stories that might otherwise disappear. She enlisted grandchildren as scribes and illustrators, making the project theirs as well as hers. Duke's decline became undeniable. His appetite decreased, his patrol shortened. He slept more deeply, sometimes requiring gentle shaking to wake. But his devotion never wavered. Each family member received daily check-ins, as if he was memorizing their presence. On a crystalline February morning, Duke didn't wake up. He'd pass peacefully in his sleep, positioned where he could see both George and Helen's bed and the door he'd guarded so faithfully. They buried him beneath the pine where he'd loved to rest on summer afternoons. The whole family came, even Marcus taking a day off from his new job. Each person shared memories: Duke's arrival as a puppy, his patient friendship through good times and bad, his role in their mountain salvation. "He was the best of us," Helen said simply. "Loyal when loyalty mattered, brave when courage was needed, present when presence was everything." The grandchildren cried openly. The adults hid tears less successfully. But there was gratitude mixed with grief for 13 years of companionship, for a peaceful ending, for love that transcended species. "Can we get another dog?" Chloe asked through tears. "Someday," George answered. When the right one finds us, Duke taught us they always do. March brought hints of spring and unexpected news. The family that had bought George and Helen's suburban house was selling. Financial troubles forced them to accept far less than they'd paid. Poetic justice, Lisa observed. Marcus stole it. Patricia got nothing from it, and now it's worth half what it was. Just a house, Helen said. Walls and roof. What made it home left when we did? The conversation triggered reflection on their journey. From comfortable suburbanites to essentially homeless. From homeless to mountain pioneers. From abandoned parents to family center. The path had been painful but transformative. Do you ever regret how it happened? Rebecca asked. George and Helen exchanged glances. The betrayal? Yes, George answered. The outcome? Never. We might have died in that suburban house, surrounded by things but empty of purpose. Instead, we discovered we had decades of life left to live. April marked 2 years since their midnight escape. The anniversary passed with little fanfare but deep recognition. The cabin that had been barely standing now provided comfortable shelter. The elderly couple who'd arrived broken had become community pillars. The family torn apart by greed had reassembled around better values. Marcus brought his children for the weekend, as had become routine. But this visit, he also brought someone new, a woman named Carol, a teacher at the local school, divorced with 2 children of her own. I wanted you to meet her before it got serious, he explained nervously. Your opinion matters. Carol proved warm, practical, and genuinely interested in their mountain life. She helped in the garden, asked intelligent questions about preservation techniques, and treated the cabin with respect rather than condescension. She's different from Patricia, Helen told George that night. Thank God for that, George replied. Maybe the boy's finally learning. May Day brought the Valley Spring Festival. George and Helen participated fully selling furniture and quilts, judging preserves, teaching traditional crafts to eager learners. They'd become not just residents, but integral threads in the community fabric. Eleanor Hartwell visited again, this time bringing collectors interested in commissioning specific pieces. George accepted select projects, pieces that challenged his skills and interested his aesthetic. The money was significant, but secondary to the satisfaction of creating lasting beauty. You've become quite famous in certain circles, Eleanor informed him. The elderly master craftsman who started over at 79. It's inspiring. Just doing what I've always done, George replied. Only difference is now people notice. Helen's quilts had found their own following. A museum requested several for an exhibition on American craft traditions. She agreed on condition. They also display the stories behind each piece, not just technique but meaning, not just art but life. June brought summer's full glory and a new addition. Lisa's family found property adjoining the family land 5 acres with a fixable cabin. They planned to create their own mountain retreat, connected but independent. We're building a compound, David joked. The Thornfield Mountain Empire, but there was truth beneath humor. The land that had sheltered 2 refugees was becoming sanctuary for extended family, seeking authenticity in an artificial world. The summer solstice found them all gathered for celebration. 3 generations around the fire, sharing food grown on their land, telling stories already becoming family legend. George's furniture gleamed in firelight. Helen's quilts draped shoulders against evening chill. Duke's grave bore fresh flowers, honoring absent friends. Look what you built from nothing, Marcus told his parents. From betrayal and abandonment, you created this. Not from nothing, Helen corrected. From everything that mattered. Love, determination, refusal to accept defeat. Those aren't nothing. They're everything. As fireflies began, their ancient dance and stars emerged in the clear mountain sky. George reflected on the journey. The comfortable suburban life, stolen by those they'd trusted most, had been replaced by something infinitely more valuable: purpose, community, family renewed and expanded. The cabin that had seemed like exile became paradise. The couple deemed too old to manage became inspiration for others facing similar crossroads. The family torn apart by one son's greed reformed around better principles, teaching new generations that worth isn't measured in possessions, but in connections. Any regrets? Helen asked, reading his contemplative mood. Only one. George admitted, that it took betrayal to find this life. Imagine if we'd had the courage to choose it freely. But we didn't, Helen said practically. And perhaps we couldn't have. Perhaps we needed to lose everything to understand what truly mattered. Perhaps, George agreed, pulling her close. Either way, we're here now, together, home. In the meadow, grandchildren chase fireflies with jars, their laughter floating on night air. Adult children sat in companionable conversation, planning shared futures. The mountains stood eternal guard, witnesses to transformation and triumph. The elderly couple who'd fled in darkness had found their light, not in the life stolen from them, but in the one they'd built from its ashes. The rotten cabin made paradise through their own hands and hearts. The family that had failed them initially had learned to succeed together. As the celebration continued into the night, one truth resonated through every story shared and plan made. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best beginnings. Sometimes being discarded allows you to discover your true worth. Sometimes paradise isn't a place you find, but one you create, board by board, meal by meal, day by day, with those who choose to stay. The story that began with betrayal ended with belonging. The couple deemed worthless proved invaluable. The cabin considered uninhabitable became the heart of a family reborn. In the end, Marcus had been wrong about everything, except one thing: his parents were indeed declining. Declining to accept defeat, declining to surrender dignity, declining to let others define their worth or limit their future. And in that refusal, they'd found their greatest victory. As you've seen, sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its worst disasters. If you enjoyed this story of triumph over betrayal, resilience over rejection, and the power of choosing your own path at any age, please subscribe to hear more incredible true stories. And click on one of the 2 videos on your screen right now for another amazing journey. Remember, it's never too late to start over, and family is who stands by you, not necessarily who shares your blood. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and the power of the human spirit to transform any situation into something beautiful.